Would like to welcome you to this week's edition of the St. Mark Spark. It's a joy to be with you all on this beautiful August afternoon. Our reading from the day comes to us from John's Gospel, chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. Listen now as God speaks to us through God's Word. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that had been done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. May this God's word speak to our hearts, our minds, our spirits. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So this is where we find ourselves this afternoon. Likely a very familiar text, a very familiar miracle, maybe the most familiar of all Jesus' miracles in the 4 Gospels. An interesting thing to note is that the story of the feeding of 5,000 is the one miracle that appears in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That and the resurrection. It's worth noting because it's worth remembering. Now we hear the story, and it's easy when we know that it's a story about the loaves and fishes to say, well, I know that one. I'm going to maybe tune out or get distracted about thinking about something else. But the invitation is to hear. Jesus in today's story is being followed by the crowds. His renown has spread. Many people have been healed, have been touched, have been cleansed. And so others are following, and some are following because they want to see the next miracle. Some are following because they need the next miracle, and some likely are following just because that's where the crowds are. But we get our first hint in today's reading that something incredible is about to happen, because it says Jesus went up the mountain. In verse 3, John 6, verse 3, it says, Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. It'd be easy to miss this, but it's one of the most important things that we can hear. Again, every time Jesus ascends up a mountain, he climbs a step. There's any kind of elevation. There is something divine that is going to happen. The miraculous, that line between heaven and earth is somehow made a little bit more thin in the thin air of that mountain. So he sits down, he's on the mountain, and he sees the large crowd. He says to Philip, "Feed them. What are we going to do?" He knows what he's going to do, but he's doing this because Jesus, although he knows what he's going to do, he's not just there to feed the 5,000. He's also there to work with his disciples. School is starting this coming Monday. We're only 5 days away from the start of school here in Parkway District in St. Louis. And so it's not just about doing for people. He's also showing his disciples what can be done. Philip doesn't get it at first. How many of us really get it at first? We get our next interesting thing that happens here. We're told that there's not enough food for everybody. You could have 6 months' wages, and not everybody would get a piece of bread. But there is Andrew. Andrew, who's Simon Peter's brother. Andrew, who's one of the first disciples. Andrew, who says, and all the people, there is a boy. And this boy is 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. We're not talking salmon. We're not talking walleye. We're talking probably some kind of small fish. But what are these among so many people? What kind of dent could this possibly make? This little boy is unnamed, or this child is unnamed. Heard many stories. People imagine what his life must have been like. But this was an offering that he made. Nobody else was offering up the food, but this boy said, you could have what I have. And then we have what is best termed a Eucharistic moment. The Eucharistic moment is something we see played out all the time in the Gospels and in the New Testament. The Eucharistic moment that we see at the Last Supper, what does Jesus do? He takes the bread. He blesses it. He breaks it. He passes it out. Jesus does not say in today's reading, this is my body which is broken for you, but this is a precursor to that. This is a hint at what is to come. So the people have sat down on the grass, the 5,000. He has this Eucharistic moment where he gives thanks, breaks the bread, passes them out. Everybody gets enough. Everybody gets enough. Now, there are different schools of thoughts on what exactly happened here. One school of thought is just as everybody took maybe a little, that the bread kept multiplying, or maybe everybody took a little and they saw what this boy had done, and maybe they had some extra bread that they had squirreled away. Maybe they had a extra loaf here or there, but that was bread for tomorrow or for the next day or for the journey home. It was something they potentially were hoarding. Both these interpretations are fine. I think the latter one is one I want to talk about today, because it's in seeing the miracle maybe of this boy giving selflessly of himself, that the men in the crowd, they see that, or they see the person next to them that keeps adding a little bit more bread. Everybody gets their fill, but there is something that happens, I think, even bigger potentially than the bread multiplying or the fish increasing. It is the miracle of generosity that might be taking place here. I think it's a beautiful thought, because so many times when we hear these stories, we think, well, this is an incredible miracle. Jesus fed the people. But we know he elevated, and something divine's about to happen. We know that he took the bread and had this Eucharistic moment. We know that he passed this bread out, and something in the passing, some other miracles were happening that weren't described here in today's reading. It was said when I moved to California, when I took my first call a little over 20 years ago, I think it was Johnny Carson or somebody who said this, that basically at the end, when America was done being built, there were just some odd nuts and bolts that just got shaken up, and they all just rolled down the country, rolled down the table to California. That so many, not everybody, but it seemed like almost everybody in California was from someplace else. So the traditional St. Louis line of asking somebody in the second sentence in meeting them, where did you go to high school? You can't do that in California, because everybody, it feels like, is from someplace else. Nobody is tied down. And there's something to be said about being footloose and fancy free and getting to see whatever you want to. There's also something to be said about those who live more of a nomadic life, that they might be doing so not out of choice, but out of the reality of their circumstances, that they are fragmented in their life. Something perhaps did not go according to plan. We just don't know what that means. They're hungry, or they're hungry for acceptance, or they're hungry for acknowledgement, or they're hungry that somebody might see them. And I think about these 5,000 people who are here, not counting the women and the children. I think about what fragmented lives they must have had, because they are following a man who is known for miracles. They're following a man who maybe they hope will feed them body and spirit. They're following him instead of doing what maybe the people who are more rooted are doing. So I think there's a beautiful moment at the end of this miracle, at the end of this passage, where everybody has been fed, everybody has had their fill. But that's not over. In verse 12, it says, when they were satisfied, Jesus tells the disciples, gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost. Gather up the fragments of bread so that nothing may be lost. And they gathered it up, the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, and they filled 12 baskets. Now, 12 we know is a holy number. 12 we know is the number of months in the year. But really the most important thing about 12, it is about the 12 tribes of Israel. It is about the 12 disciples, which is another way to understand how Jesus is continuing in fulfilling what is originally promised to the 12 tribes of Israel. They fill 12 basketfuls, which means enough for each disciple, enough for each tribe, enough for all of Israel, for all the fragments, because from the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, even through Jesus' time, there had been divisions, and there had been invasions, and there had been exile and diaspora and people being spread out. And so Israel at this point, even though Jesus is in Israel, it is a people that are living fragmented lives. And Jesus says that's not the way things are supposed to be. That's not going to last. And so the miracle that happens in people sharing the bread with one another is the miracle that leads to that there is an excessive amount of these fragments. And Jesus does not want anything to be left to waste. Gather up the fragments that are left over so that nothing may be lost. But also, probably more importantly, what Jesus is saying here is gather up the people who are living fragmented lives, the people the world might look at who are broken, who are crushed, who have been somehow torn apart. Gather these people up so that no one may be lost. The people see the sign that had been done, the sign that had been done through Jesus, but also the sign and the thing that Jesus had empowered them to do. And they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. The one for whom they have waited is the one who is here. The one that is to come into the world is right there on the mountain, right there in this Eucharistic moment, right here in the distribution of food, right there in the miracle that begets miracles, right there in the command to gather up all that could be lost, because nothing is going to separate God from God's plan of salvation and redemption. This is, again, a beautiful passage. It is a passage to remind us that God is not only the one who feeds, God's the one who gives daily bread. God is the one who supports us. God is the one who knows those places where we are broken. God knows those places where we are torn apart. God knows those places where we are battered and we are scattered. And God knows how our lives so oftentimes feel fragmented. And God says to the world, God says to the people, Jesus says to you today, I want to gather you up so that none, including you, might be lost. May we be so fed by this daily bread. May we be so encouraged by this good news. May we recognize these blessings and see in them that indeed our cup is overflowing and we need to fill up someone else's today. Go out, friends, with this good news, with this miracle, and multiply it. God be with you all.